evening, everyone, and welcome to Experiential Learning 4. This is our 5th week of experiential learning. So making good headway, and today we're going to be specifically focusing on lesson 5, which specifically focuses on self-awareness. So that's what we're going to be looking at today specifically. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really do appreciate it. If everyone can just please record their attendance for me in the meeting chat by typing their name, their student number in the meeting chat, just so that I'm able to take your attendance. And then once we have taken attendance, we will then have a chat about the fact that there's workshops again taking place next week, and when your workshop is next week, then you can take notes of that. And then we will start with our lecture today on self-awareness and how do we create self-awareness and how do we ultimately become more self-aware. That is the focus of our lecture today, and then I'll give you some time to answer any and all questions that you might have. So thank you for everyone who has recorded their attendance already. I just want to note to you, I've also noted to you on the WhatsApp group that we're going to be having workshops again next week. So we'll have a workshop again next week for Experiential Learning 4. So we are going to have an opportunity to see each other again and chat. As you all know, I communicated with you yesterday when our experiential learning workshop will be. Kindly note that next week, Monday, is a public holiday, so that's why our workshop won't be on Monday. The workshop will take place on Friday, the 26th of March from 1 to 3 in room 7. So next week, Friday, we will have our workshop. I'm just going to pop this into the meeting chat for you, yeah, just so you can all also have it on your side. So that is the date and the time of our next workshop. That is next week, Friday. So keep next week, Friday afternoon open from 1 to 3. We're going to have a workshop in room 7 on the campus on 11th Street. So make sure that you all attend. Once again, you all know that the workshops are compulsory, and it really gives you a great opportunity to interact. We're going to have a really fun workshop next week. We'll once again have a little bit more look at the formative assessment and see if you started working on the formative assessment and get some feedback on that. And we'll cover the content for next week, and we'll do some interactive activities in the workshop as well that relates to the content that we've covered. So I have a really fun workshop planned for us next week. So please do make sure that you come to the workshop next week, Friday. And then I will see you then next week, Friday. So what we're going to do today is we are specifically covering chapter 2 on self-awareness in the textbook. So we're going to be looking at ourselves and doing some introspection and having a look at our own weaknesses and our own strengths, and really looking at ourselves in a very critical manner. But that is all obviously in a positive way in order for us to improve ourselves. So let's have a look at the lecture for today. The lecture for today is a little bit interactive, so I'm going to ask you to interact with me during the course of this lecture. The first thing I want you to do is I want you, where you are sitting now, to take a selfie of yourself, if it's possible. Maybe some of you are on your phone, maybe some of you are on your laptop, but if you're able to take a selfie of yourself now, take a selfie of yourself now. You might be in your pajamas, you might be in work attire, you might be driving in the car, or you might be just chilling. I'm at work in my work attire. So take a selfie of yourself. And then what I want you to do is I want you to really have a look at a selfie. And what would you tell me if you had to introduce that person in your selfie? So look at the selfie, and then I want you to type for me in the meeting chat. If you had to look at that person in the selfie, how would you introduce that person in your selfie? So if I had to look at myself, I would look at myself. Remember, you're just looking at the selfie. You're not looking at anything or anyone else. If you had to look at that person, how would you introduce them? So I want you to all type for me in the meeting chat if you had to take a selfie of yourself now, and then introduce yourself to me in the meeting chat by just looking at your selfie. Nothing else. It's a really critical activity in doing some self-reflection. So I want you to do that. That's why I say to you, our class is going to be super interactive today. Think about what you're wearing. Think about when you look at a selfie of yourself, what does it say about you? Are there some things that it makes you self-aware of? Some of us have our left side of our face better than our right side of our face. We all take selfies with it's very much intentional. when we take selfies. So I want you to think about that when you're taking a selfie. When you have to introduce that person in your selfie to me, I want you to do that because we're definitely going to be doing that in our workshop next week Friday. So next week Friday, you need to dress to impress because we're going to be taking selfies of ourselves. Or you can come in your PJs, that's entirely fine. So this is kind of a dry run for our in-class workshop activity next week. We're all going to be taking selfies and doing some self-reflection and creating some self-awareness about who we are as individuals. Okay, so I don't know if you guys are going to respond to me by introducing yourself to me in the meeting chat. So if you're busy with it, great. If you're not, that's completely fine. We're going to extend this activity into our workshop next week Friday. So if you're going to be taking a selfie now or a selfie next week Friday, it's ultimately going to be the same selfie. I like May. Okay, definitely. Okay, May says she is young, friendly person who is dedicated to her curls. I like that. Okay. So she just looked at it herself, and that is a really nice summary. You see how you're kind of looking at who you are as a person, some of your qualities, and obviously you're looking at some of your looks. Those are the things that obviously that you see in a selfie. So if I had to look at my selfie, I'm just going to use a selfie that is on my profile picture because that's kind of the easiest one for you to kind of see and relate to. I would say I'm relatively young. I think young is not such a great description anymore. I'm relatively young. I think I'm quite ambitious and dedicated, and I am really much dedicated towards my professional development and success. Hey, Tipo saying, my name is Tipo, a beautiful, radiant young individual. Even when not trying, however, my big button nose does sometimes bother her. Okay, so we all have those quirks that there's something about us that we don't like, but it's easy to point out if we don't like our nose or our eyes or our ears. Those are easy things to point out. But when you're going to be looking at doing some in-depth self-reflection about our character traits and who we are as individuals, it becomes a lot more difficult. And that's really what this lecture is dedicated us to ultimately create a sense of self-awareness. So I want you to keep typing that into the meeting chat. We're going to definitely carry on with this next week Friday, and we're going to make it a super interactive activity. And we're really going to do this in front of everyone. So bring your A game and your confidence, because we're going to have a really great workshop next week. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the slides with you so we can start our lecture, so that we can get started in the concept of what is self-awareness, how do we create self-awareness, how do we measure our self-awareness, and why is it ultimately so important? So today we're busy with lesson 5. Lesson 5 is titled The Self in the Workplace Part 1. So this week we're doing the Self in the Workplace Part 1, and then next week we're going to be doing the Self in the Workplace Part 2. So next week's lecture is pretty much an extension of today's lecture. So that's why I'm going to take what we do today into our workshop next week, and we're going to have a really fun time. So let's look at some of the lesson objectives. So at the end of this lesson, we're going to try and reinforce having a sense of self, and what does that ultimately mean? Establish and evaluate your self-awareness. Understanding the managing others starts with knowing and managing yourself, and then acknowledging individual differences and adapting and accommodating when necessary. So ultimately acknowledging that we're all different, and obviously we all have different wants and needs, and the fact that we need to be able to accommodate and be open to one another. So like I said, to take a selfie and introduce the person in your selfie. What does it mean to know yourself? So many people would say what it means to know yourself is to pretty much know what you want in life and what you want to achieve. But there are many deeper things that we need to uncover about what does it mean to know yourself? And that's a really difficult question, because I think we all think we know ourselves and we know what we want. But as we are individuals, we grow over time, and knowing ourselves and who we are constantly is in flux, because we are constantly growing and adapting and changing and becoming someone else. There's no one person that will be the same person now, and in 10 years time will look back and be like, I'm exactly the same person. We all grow and evolve. So what does it ultimately mean to know yourself? Does it mean that you are all aware that we have character flaws? Does it mean that we all know that we have strengths and weaknesses. Does it mean that we all know what we want in life? Does it mean that we are all strong-headed and dedicated? What does it mean to know yourself? And I think that's a really difficult question. So I want you to think about that for the next week. We're really going to get into that in our workshop next week. And this is all related to the concept of self-awareness. So obviously many of us try and avoid self-awareness would rather want to enhance our self-conception of the way that others see us. That's why when you take a selfie, it is always the best photo. No one takes just one selfie and posts it. That never happens. Everyone is always taking 50 selfies, and then you going through them and narrowing them down to the 5, then you edit those 5, and then from those 5 you maybe choose 2. You're not just taking the first best photo of yourself. You're taking multiples and then looking for the best one. And we all have our quirks of how we take selfies, the angle, the light, the photo from the side, from the bottom, from the left, or the right. Because we always want people to see us in our best light. Okay? Yet, obviously, that's not who we are all the time. That is maybe who we are, maybe 5% of the week, but that's not who we are all the time. If we open ourselves to things, we might find things we like, but we might also find things that scare us. And I think there's many of our weaknesses scare us, and that's completely fine because we are human. A lot of people are deathly afraid of rejection, so we put up a facade that we think it is better than who we really are. So many of us aren't true to who we are. We'll rather be something we're not because we're scared that someone rejects us if we are who we are. And I don't think that is just specific to one individual. I think we all do that. I think we all put a face on because we want to be the best version of ourselves, even if on that day we might not be feeling the best. And I think by being ourselves, I think it scares us by being ourselves because we fear rejection so much. And last week in the workshop, one of the students asked, what do I do if I get rejected? And that's a critical question. Rejection is just such a big thing. And I think it's important that when we look at rejection, we always look at the fact that rejection is not something personal. It's not something, it doesn't necessarily always have to do with us and who we are. Rejection, people get rejected for positions for multiple reasons, not just because they are not good looking enough or not friendly enough. They might get rejected because they were maybe not a good fit, or the fact that maybe they are looking for someone with a different skill set. It is not in any means a direct reflection of who we are. So what is important and what I want you to do for the workshop next week is I want you to complete all the self-assessment exercises in chapter 2. As we go along, you will see I've highlighted the self-assessment exercises, but you need to do all those self-assessments and all those self-awareness questionnaires in chapter 2 for next week. Because we're going to be chatting about that in the workshop as well, and chatting about the scores that we got. We already spoke about the type of communicators who we are, and now we're going to be looking at our self-awareness and where does that really lie, what type of personality do we have, what are our character traits, what are our cognitive levels, all those things we're going to be looking at next week. But what does self-awareness mean? Because it's ultimately a loaded word. So self-awareness is really the ability to take an honest look at your life without having any attachment to it that your life is right or wrong. Obviously, everyone thinks that they're living their true authentic life and their life is right. And it's easy to judge someone else on their life. But self-awareness is really taking any and all biases out of that and looking at your life without any attachment, without any biases. And that's something that is really difficult to do. So what is your self-awareness? Do you lack self-awareness? If so, would you be able to identify with the following indicators? So I just want you to mentally say yes or no. You don't have to type this out for me. Just mentally say yes. Do you have a hard time understanding what you are feeling? This often means that you reduce your emotions to simply feeling like angry for all negative emotions. So irrespective of what the negative emotion is, you're just angry. You don't feel heartbroken, you won't feel wrenched, you'll just feel angry. Do you find it difficult to speak about your feelings and thoughts with others? Are you at constant loss in your thoughts? So you're constantly just whirling around in your thoughts?
Yes.
Are you frequently infuriated by grief? Do you have low self-esteem? You share self-destructive signs like leaving assignments to the last possible minute and being the procrastinator of all. I think we all have definitely some self-destructive traits. I am also guilty of that. Do you have very weak sense of self, or you have a very rigid identity, so you fit into a very specific box? This means that you change yourself based on the people you're with, or that you're unable to be flexible to help and accommodate others. So if you've answered yes to any of these, and I'm sure more, we have all answered yes to at least one, it can either mean that ultimately maybe we are very self-aware, or it could mean that we lack self-awareness. Either or, and we'll be looking at that. No one is perfect. No one said no to any of these questions. Everyone said at least yes to one of them. And this helps us to create self-awareness. If you are aware of the fact that you have self-destructive signs by being a chronic procrastinator and procrastinating to the last minute, being aware of the fact that you are that helps you in obviously combating that and working on that. And this is super important to have a high level of self-awareness, because in an interview, a prospective employer is always going to ask you, what is your weakness? And a weakness is such a difficult thing to answer. We all know our weaknesses, but it is very difficult to tell a prospective employer what your weakness is. You don't want your prospective employer to know that you're a chronic procrastinator and you do everything to the last minute. But we all have a weakness. But we can only identify our weaknesses and our strengths if we are self-aware. If we lack any self-awareness, we are unable to do that. And self-awareness is something that is really powerful. So for example, in an interview, they always ask me what my weakness is, and I will straight up say, often when someone gives me too much to do, I easily feel overwhelmed. But I'm super aware of the fact. So what I do is I make a list and I'll work through my list. So what you then consequently do is you take your weakness, you indicate to them that you're able to identify your weakness, so you are inherently very self-aware. You're self-aware in the fact that you are aware of it and the fact that you know how to deal with it. So you take your weakness and ultimately turn it into a positive. And that is the goal of self-awareness. Being aware of your weaknesses and strengths and ultimately translating them into something positive. That is the most important thing about what self-awareness does. But we'll practice that a lot more next week. We need to balance the need to know with the fear of what we will learn, as gaining the knowledge of our strengths and weaknesses can help us gain insight. It also helps us to have answers to those tricky interview questions, like the one I've just given you. They like asking you, what is your weakness? There are many people in the world that be like, I have no weaknesses, I'm absolutely perfect. Many people will say that to you. And inherently, that is the incorrect answer, because that means that that person ultimately lacks any self-awareness. That person cannot do any introspection. And I'm sure we've all encountered someone that you're in an argument with them and they're never wrong. It's always everyone else's fault, but their own fault. Even if 5 other people have told them they've done something wrong, they will rather blame the 5 other people and they will never look at themselves. People like that inherently lack self-awareness and they lack emotional intelligence, because that ultimately extends to emotional intelligence, of what we're going to be doing next week. And they lack any ability to introspect. And that is a character flaw inherently. So being self-aware and being able to introspect is something that is to be important. It is not something that is natural, nor does it come very easy. So therefore, it is important for us to have self-awareness. The more we know about ourselves, the better we are, the better we can understand ourselves. Then we can understand, how do other people perceive us? Why do people respond to us in a particular way? And maybe what are some of our basic behavioral tendencies? Why are we the chronic procrastinators? I'm a chronic procrastinator too, because I know I perform under pressure, and nothing motivates me like pressure, being under pressure. It is a very bad character trait, but it is something that works for me. I'm a terrible chronic procrastinator, and I think many of us are chronic procrastinators, because there is nothing like the motivation of getting it done now, and there is no other option but doing it now. I think we are all ultimately guilty of that. How can you expect it to motivate others if you cannot motivate yourself? The same can be said for management. So self-awareness, ultimately being self-aware, extends to the fact that are you able to self-motivate, and are you able to manage your own responsibilities, and are you accountable to those? And being self-aware is really the starting point. If you are self-aware, you know what your character flaws are, and you know what motivates you. Like, nothing motivates me more like a deadline, a pressing deadline. It is really bad to say, but that's ultimately true. So I know what motivates me. But also the end goal often motivates me, the big picture, the big goal motivates me. And those are the things that I only know what motivates me because I'm self-aware of who I am as a person. Okay? And when you are self-aware about your weaknesses, you can also able to therefore manage them. And that's why it's so key to interview. When they ask you what your weakness is, that you're able to identify your weakness, but you're also able to show that you have your weakness under control. You're able to self-manage your weakness and turn it into something positive. Self-awareness is knowing what motivates you. It's knowing what your emotions are, what your personality is, what you like, what you dislike, what challenges you. And these are key things that build your leadership ability and your leadership qualities. And we all have leadership abilities. Some of us are just stronger in some areas than others because we have practiced it over time. And to say that someone can never be self-aware is wrong. We can all practice by being more self-aware, and by being more self-aware is ultimately something that is really healthy for us to do. But we have to practice to be self-aware. It's not something that comes naturally. The purpose of the self-assessment chapter, because you'll look at chapter 2, and there are many self-assessments, and you must do all those self-assessments in chapter 2, is ultimately to allow you to become more aware of your own behaviors and how they might impact others. The knowledge that you will gain by doing all these self-assessment questionnaires will help you obviously identify areas that your strengths and your weaknesses, and identify areas of self-awareness that you maybe did not know that existed, and areas where you can improve, and areas for growth. And this is ultimately such an important thing, is that we do it by ourselves. You can't ask someone else's opinion about yourself. You really have to ask yourself those questions and answer them as truthfully as you possibly can. If you answer those self-assessment questions by giving an inaccurate answer, you're going to have an inaccurate result, and it's not going to be a true self-reflection of who you are. So when you do those self-reflection exercises in chapter 2, you must always try to be as honest as you possibly can, because you want to obviously get the right results, because it is ultimately what those self-assessment activities do, is they help us to create a self-awareness. So you need to do that for next week, and we're going to discuss that next week, and next week I'll do some of those with you. So now that we know what self-awareness is, how do we increase our self-awareness? Because like I said to you, it can obviously be learned. One of the easiest ways to increase self-awareness is to solicit feedback, so to get feedback. And that is one of the key things that those self-assessment activities are going to do in chapter 2. It gives you an answer by giving you a rating, and inherently so ultimately gives you feedback on that specific self-assessment questionnaire that you've done. So feedback is super important, and honest feedback is often the best way of gaining self-awareness. But gaining feedback is not really nice, especially not gaining honest feedback is not something that always comes easily. Because what would we do if we solicit feedback and the feedback we get is negative, and then we see it as rejection? So it's important that whenever we get feedback, we see it as critical and feedback and constructive feedback, and we look at areas where we can improve. Instead of looking at it as all bad, we try to put it in a positive light. You can get feedback from your lecturers, from your friends, from your parents, anyone that you trust to tell you the truth. You're not just going to go up to some stranger and be like, oh, so what do you think about me? That's very inaccurate. So you want to do it to someone that's close to you so that they can tell you who you really are. And you will see our friends often are very easy at creating self-awareness, or our partners or our parents, because they know us so intimately that they know our flaws, they know when we do something wrong, they know when we over procrastinate, and they'll easily point it out. We don't like hearing it, but it helps in creating self-awareness. So the end goal is super positive. Another way of gaining self-awareness is to do some self-reflection. But I feel like self-awareness and self-reflection go hand in hand. In order to be self-aware, you need to reflect. In order to reflect, you need to be self-aware. Those are inherently two in the same thing. And reflection can review your experiences, situations, and actions in order to learn from them. So say, for example, you had a huge argument with your parents. You go to bed at night and you sit there and you think about the fight. You run the events over and over and over in your head, and you look at, okay, what was my role in this? Instead of looking what everyone else did wrong, is to self-reflect and understand the role that we play. We are by no means innocent in any situation. We always have a role to play. Whether that role is positive or negative, we always have a role to play. So we can never negate the fact that we are innocent in anything. Whether we are guilty of playing a good role or a bad role, irrespective, we are playing a role. So reflection is super important, but reflection is something that is ultimately to make you more mindful of your actions, to sit there and think back and reflect. But not everyone has the ability to self-reflect. And that's why I say reflection and self-awareness for myself goes hand in hand, because it's ultimately to be self-aware, you need to be able to reflect, and to reflect, you need to be able to be self-aware. So vice versa. And there's many ways in which we reflect. We all reflect in some way. Some of us are just more successful at it than others. Another way in which you can increase your self-awareness is by writing a journal or blogging. That also helps you to reflect on your experiences. So many people will keep a daily diary in which they then write in their diary what they did for that day and what they experienced on that day. And that is also a very key self-reflective exercise, or blogging. It also is inherently the same as journaling, just in the new information age. And in your journal or your blog, you can detail the ways in which you could have handled things better and how you would have improved on the future. So you're really looking at the situations in your day and think of what situations went well, which is bad, and where you can improve. And your journal or your blog can also include any goals and aims that you might have. Maybe you aspire that next time you want to be more empathetic towards your friend when your friend's crying. Maybe today you lacked empathy. So that is also a great way in which you can create self-awareness. And you're going to be doing a blogging and journal writing in your experiential learning experience. So just as a side note, as part of formative assessment 2, you're going to have to blog after every day that you worked. So you're going to be working obviously 80 working hours, which is 2 working weeks. And there's 5 days in a week, so you're going to be working 10 days in total. And for your formative assessment 2, you're going to have to write 10 different blog posts where you reflect on your experiential working experience at the organization of your choice. And that ultimately is to enhancing your self-awareness and make you aware of your development process and what you have learned throughout the course. So just as a side note, I'm letting you know we're going to be doing this because reflection is super key. Another way is we can do self-performance appraisal, and that's what they often do at companies. They often will obviously performance appraise you. You might have on an annual basis, or sometimes on a quarterly basis, or some people have performance appraisals based on whether they have met a certain goal in a specific time frame. So performance appraisals are also a way in which you can do that. Or you could, for example, do the self-assessment questionnaires in your textbook, and then once you've done those, you can work on yourself, and then 6 months later, you can retake those self-assessment questionnaires in order to see if your results have improved. That is also a nice way of which you can do it. Also, please note that you need to complete the self-awareness questionnaires and read through the interpretation of the results from page 17 to 19. That means you need to do all the self-assessment questionnaires from page 17 to page 39 in chapter 2 for next week. So you can do all those self-assessment questionnaires in pencil in your book. There's ample space for you to write your results and everything. So I want you to do that for next week for our workshop. So now that we've looked at some ways to improve self-awareness, we said, yes, you can ask for feedback, so soliciting feedback. You can also recognize your strengths and your weaknesses. Okay, you can self-reflect. You can monitor your self-talk. That is to ensure that you talk positively to yourself. We are so easy at really speaking down to ourselves, or speaking badly to ourselves. Speaking positive to ourselves really makes a good impact. Practicing on saying no, especially those who are people pleasers, you need to practice on saying no and question your decisions. If you've made a decision, always think of all the possible options and think, did you make the best decision? Ensure that any decision you make are good ones. Any and all decisions you make are good by coming up with 3 reasons as why you should pursue those decisions. If you can't come up with 3 good reasons of why you should take this decision, then maybe it's not a good idea to take this decision. But that is so difficult to do because all decisions require us to weigh our decision. If we decide on eating a lunch bar chocolate later on after dinner, we might not be weighing it up because it might all be negative. But because we all act impulsively, but when we are making big decisions that ultimately going to impact our life in the long term, it's important that we weigh up our decisions by coming up with 3 reasons as to why this decision is a good decision and why I should follow through with this decision. So think about that. These are some other ways in which we can improve our self-awareness. So when we are looking at self-awareness, you get both internal self-awareness and external self-awareness. Okay, so some people have low internal self-awareness, and low external self-awareness. So you'll see people with low external self-awareness and low internal self-awareness are known as seekers. Seekers are defined as they don't yet know who they are, what they stand for, or what their teams see them. As a result, they might feel stuck or frustrated with their performance and their relationship. That's a seeker. Someone with a low external self-awareness and a high internal self-awareness are those that are introspective. They are able to introspect and self-reflect. They're clear on who they are, but don't challenge their own views or search for blind spots by getting feedback from others. They can harm their relationships and limit their success. Okay? Because they are very critical of themselves, but they don't like it when other people are critical of them. I'm definitely an introspector. Then you get those that have high external self-awareness and high internal self-awareness. Those are people who are aware. They know who they are, they want to accomplish, and they seek out the value of others' opinions. This is where leaders begin to fully realize the benefits of self-awareness. So that's kind of the end goal, the perfect idea of self-awareness. You have high levels of internal and high levels of external self-awareness. Then you get people with high external self-awareness, but low internal self-awareness. These are the people pleasers. They can be so focused on appearing a certain way to others that they could be overlooking what matters to them. Over time, they tend to make choices that aren't in their own success and fulfillment. So they kind of try and please others, and in the end, they don't please themselves. So it might be the fact that none of us fall particularly into one category. During different periods of our life or during certain decisions, we might fall into any one of these categories. I know definitely I can be a people's pleaser, but I know that I can also do a lot of introspection. And sometimes I can be aware as well. So by no means it means that we all fall into one category all the time. Okay? So read those categories and think which one do you currently fall into, or do you think you fall into more than one? I want you to think about that. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to go watch the YouTube video on 3 strategies to becoming more self-aware. So what can you do in your life today to become more self-aware? And I've already given you some of those strategies, such as self-reflection, soliciting feedback, writing journals or blogging, but you can also go look at some other strategies of becoming more self-aware. And then I just want you to remind you that your formative assessment is due on Friday, the 30th of April, and it's an online submission. But during our workshop next week, we will once again look at the formative assessment one. So this is just a note for you as a reminder. So that's our lecture for today. What do you have to do for next week? So for next week, you need to read the textbook, chapter 3 and 4, because in next week's lesson, we're going to be covering both chapter 3 and 4 of the textbook. You need to complete all the self-assessment questionnaires in chapter 2. I want you to reflect on a person who has made a positive impact in mentoring you. So someone who has had a positive impact on your life. That could be a family member, a friend, maybe an employee, a boss, a teacher, a colleague, or whatever the case may be. And I want you to reflect on yourself in a leadership position and the responsibility of taking someone under your wing. So maybe you have a younger brother or sister, and how do you mentor them? Because I'm sure we've all been in that position. Or maybe you were in a leadership position in a company or at a school or at a university. So think a bit about that. And then you need to complete your observation task sheet that is part of your practicum information pack. So get in touch with your professional working person, record on the task sheet their comments and advice on self-assessment. This input will contribute towards the building knowledge of the theoretical assessments. So the observation task sheet is not that important for next week. What is super important for next week is I want you to read the textbook chapter 3 and 4 and complete all the self-assessment questionnaires in chapter 2, because that's what we're going to be focusing on in our workshop. Yeah, and that's our lecture for today. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask? We have 4.5 more minutes left. May is saying, when referring to external self-awareness, what do we look at? Example, internal self-awareness, looking at ourselves internally. Would external self-awareness be our reaction? So external self-awareness is how open are we to other people's criticism and what other people say about ourselves? Because we all have internal self-awareness because we are all able to criticize ourselves and tell us where we've gone wrong. But how open are we to receiving feedback? So that's where external self-awareness comes in, comes towards the feedback. For me, it's very difficult for me to get feedback. because I take it very critically and very personally. So it's very difficult for me to take external external feedback, and therefore my external self-awareness isn't always as high as what it could be, because I'm not very open to feedback. There are people that are, on the other hand, very open to feedback. So internal is coming from ourselves, and external is coming, what do other people say about us? How do they provide us feedback about who we are as individuals? I hope that answers your question, May. Does anyone have any other questions that they would like to ask? So thanks, May. May says that's good. Just for you to note, as a little bit of a side note, all the Zoom lecture recordings have been uploaded for you on Core Campus. If you click under modules and you go according to the weeks, all of those Zoom recordings have been uploaded there for you. I was able to get the academic manager to help me upload them for you. So you can go watch all our Zoom lecture recordings all the weeks if you've missed any, just for you to note. If you were not in Friday's class, it's not a problem at all. The lecture recording for last week Friday's class is available under, if you go to modules and you look at last week's dates, it sits there. It says week 4 Zoom lecture recording. So just go have a look there. It is there, and everything was already uploaded on Monday, if I'm not mistaken. You can just go to week 4, the week of the 8th to the 12th of March. You'll see it will say EXL, Experiential Learning 4, Zoom recording week 4. So it is there, so you can go download and listen to it at any time. And then after today's recording, I will download it again and we will upload it onto Core Campus so that you have access to it and you can go listen to it at your own time. But thank you so much for joining me, everyone. Just because we're running out of time, should you have any questions, please feel free to direct those questions to the WhatsApp group. They are there, and the WhatsApp group is there, and I will assist you as far as I possibly can. And then please remember of our workshop taking place next week, Friday, the 26th of March, from 1 to 3 in room 7. But I will remind you during the course of next week, just so that you don't forget about our workshop. But I hope that you all have a wonderful Thursday evening, have a good Friday, and have an amazing long weekend. Yes, it is a long weekend, a very well-deserved one nonetheless. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful long weekend, and then I'll chat to you all next week. Thanks so much for joining me this evening, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.